Archaeologists are often accused of studying dead people, which is unfair because sometimes we also make bread out of them, sort of. Our big story today is mummy bread. No, 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 not that kind of mummy bread. No, no, not that either. Wrong kind of mummy. But we'll get to this one later. We're talking, of course, about the famous Ötzi the Iceman. This truth is stranger than fiction story is that scientists have just baked a loaf of sourdough bread using yeast from a 5,300-year-old mummy found frozen in the Alps, which, I'll be honest, that sounds absolutely disgusting until you realize that Europeans once used to eat actual mummies. Yes, actual mummies as medicine. I'm Flint Dibble. I'm an archaeologist and a historian, and welcome back to Old News, where today's fresh news comes with a 5,000-year-old starter culture. Every so often, archaeology produces a story that sounds completely made up, and well, this is one of them. Now, if you've never heard of Ötzi, here's why archaeologists absolutely cannot stop talking about him. Back in 1991, two hikers crossing high in the Ötztal Alps on the border between Austria and Italy spotted what looked like the body of a recently deceased mountaineer melting out of the ice. Rescuers were called, and the body was chipped out of the glacier. And only afterwards did anyone realize that this was not a modern tragedy at all. The man had died over 5,000 years ago. Suddenly, archaeologists were not looking at a missing hiker. They were looking at one of the best preserved prehistoric people ever discovered. And Ötzi has been transforming archaeology ever since. Because unlike most prehistoric burials, where we're lucky to recover a few bones, Ötzi was preserved almost exactly as he died. His clothes survived. His shoes survived. His backpack, his bow, his copper axe, still one of the oldest complete copper axes ever found. Even the tattoos on his skin survived. Researchers have examined his DNA and they've reconstructed his appearance. They've studied the contents of his stomach and determined that shortly before he died, he enjoyed a hearty meal of ibex, like a wild goat, and red deer. It was a fatty last meal, in fact. Then someone shot him in the back with an arrow. He collapsed high in the mountains, and snow covered his body. For more than 5,000 years, the glacier protected him from decay. This is the OG cold case, and one of the primo examples of archaeological forensics in action. It is absolutely impossible to overstate how amazeballs his preservation is. For us archaeologists, Ötzi is not just a mummy, he is a one-of-a-kind time capsule. Every new technique developed by science eventually gets pointed at him, from forensics to biomolecular methods, because if there's a question you can ask about prehistoric life, there are chances that Ötzi can help answer it. And that, my friends, is exactly what happened a few weeks ago. This time, researchers weren't interested in Ötzi himself. They were interested in the tiny organisms living on and within his remains, specifically the community of microbes associated with the mummy. They were hoping to understand the bacteria that lived with him in life and those that colonized the mummy during its time in the glacier and due to modern conservation efforts. And of course, they wanted to figure out how to distinguish these different microorganisms so they could get at his own microbiome. Such a study can show us more about the Iceman himself and also about how he's been so remarkably preserved for such a long time. As the team put it in their article, quote, "It reveals that the Iceman is not a biologically frozen time capsule, but rather a complex ecosystem. The fascinating part for us is that using modern genetic techniques, they identified several species of cold-adapted yeast that had survived alongside Ötzi in this frozen environment. The researchers then actually isolated those yeasts, grew them under laboratory conditions, and asked what is perhaps the most inevitable question in microbiology. Can we bake bread with this? Apparently, the answer was yes. And the result is an honest-to-goodness loaf of sourdough. And I got to admit, it is described as considerably more appetizing and delicious than mummy bread has any right to. Lead researcher Mohammed Sarhan said, "If you tell anyone that you have yeast, they immediately ask, can we use it for bread? We made some really good dough with it." And the researchers have even suggested that, guess what? Beer may be next. Because, of course, you have a brand new, or rather quite old strain of yeast. You got to culture it, ferment it, and drink it. Cheers. Now, before anyone starts imagining that this is some kind of copper-aged sourdough starter that's been passed down for 5,000 years, that's not what happened. And we're going to come back to exactly what these yeasts are and why scientists are so interested in them at the end of this video. But before we get there, it's important to note that this is not the first time scientists have tried baking bread with ancient microbes. And the previous attempt came from a rather unexpected source. Back in 2019, Seamus Blackley, you might know him as one of the creators of Microsoft's Xbox. Well, he decided to pursue a fun side project that only someone with an archaeologist's curiosity could dream up. Sorry, beer break. Working with archaeologist Serena Love and microbiologist Richard Bowman, he wanted to know whether microorganisms might still survive inside ancient Egyptian bread and beer vessels from thousands of years ago. The team carefully sampled porous ceramics from museum collections and attempted to culture the microorganisms they found. Eventually, they baked bread using the resulting starter, and the internet absolutely loved it.
This bread sure looks tasty. You'd never guess the most important ingredient is from 4,500 years ago. The yeast used to bake the loaf comes from ancient Egypt. The yeast was meticulously extracted from these ceramic pots. It was then mixed with an ancient grain to create authentic dough.
I sure know I did. I started following Seamus at this time, and he follows me back. Headlines around the world proclaimed that scientists had baked bread using ancient Egyptian yeast. It was one of those rare archaeology stories that escaped our little academic bubble and went properly viral. And to be fair, it was a pretty cool piece of experimental archaeology. While it's not been fully published yet, it did get millions of people thinking about ancient food, modern technology, and how remarkably sophisticated Egyptian bakers actually were. But there's an important difference between that project and the new Ötzi study. The new Ötzi research takes a different approach. Instead of beginning with the question of whether archaeological yeast could be used for modern bread, it begins with a detailed peer-reviewed microbiome study using modern genetic analyses to characterize the microorganisms associated with the mummy. The loaf of bread here is not the scientific result, nor is the beer that they're going to eventually brew. At this point, the bread and the beer is just a spectacle associated with the scientific report, though hopefully it'll become more. In many ways, it's a wonderfully tangible way of showing that these remarkable yeasts are not only present, they're still alive and functional after thousands of years. After all, you can make bread with them. And if you think that's the weirdest thing anyone has ever done with an ancient mummy, well, history has something much stranger waiting for us. As strange as all of this sounds, at least today's scientists stopped at the yeast. Because for centuries, Europeans had a rather different idea. Why bake bread with microbes from a mummy when you could just eat the mummy. And yeah, this is a real part of history. Beginning in the Middle Ages and exploding during the Renaissance, a substance called mumia became one of Europe's most sought after medicines. So, if you think the supplements hawked by podcast bros today are wild, yeah, it could always be worse, right? Originally, the Arabic word mumia referred to the naturally occurring bitumen, a kind of mineral pitch that was thought to have medicinal properties. Somewhere along the way, Europeans got a little confused and started associating it with the ground up bitumen and human remains from a mummy. Interestingly, our modern English word mummy originally meant this ground up powder substance and was only later applied to the whole, well, mummy. You got to learn something new every day, right? If bitumen from Egyptian mummies was medicinal, surely the mummies themselves were even better. And so began one of history's strangest pharmaceutical crazes. Yeah, take a drink, take a drink. So, Egyptian mummies were dug up and imported to Europe by the thousands. The bodies were pulverized into powder. Apothecaries sold mumia alongside other medicines. Doctors prescribed it for everything from headaches and stomach aches to broken bones and internal bleeding. The kings reportedly took it, and the wealthy prized it.
I've been starting a new supplement. I'm really excited to tell you about it.
Okay.
It's called Mania.
Mumia.
Mania.
Mumia.
It is just the most incredible supplement. It makes me feel like an actual god on this earth. Like a full protector of the faith, divine right by God, doué mandois, you know? Like coming down. And it is so good. I take it orally. I take it topically. Wow. I could have 50 more sons.
That is incredible. Can you take it, suppository?
Yeah, you can take it anyway.
Fantastic.
So long as your physician knows how to do it properly. So you've never heard of mumia?
No.
No. Okay. It's actual Egyptian pharaohs.
Get the fuck out, what?
I am dead serious, bro.
Oh, I fucking love that sketch. 10 out of 10. That is quality. But yeah, like I said, our supplement bros ain't got nothing on this medieval fad. The demand became so enormous that people started faking mummies just to keep up with the market. Think about that for a second. Ancient Egyptians invested extraordinary effort into preserving their dead so that they might live forever in the afterlife. Europeans took a look at those carefully preserved bodies and thought, why don't we just eat them? Just a little bite. History is fucking weird. And it doesn't stop there. By the 19th century, mummies had become entertainment. Victorian elites held elaborate mummy unwrapping parties where guests gathered to watch ancient Egyptians literally unwrapped in their drawing rooms. That's gruesome. In many ways, though, it's not too different from our unboxing videos on Instagram or TikTok, but instead it's a fucking mummy, a deceased, formerly wealthy Egyptian from thousands of years earlier. This mummy mania, as it's so called, also existed in the arts. A pigment called mummy brown, which at least originally was made from actual ground-up Egyptian mummy, and it was used by master painters. So, if you've ever admired a 19th century painting, well, there's a small chance that part of an ancient Egyptian is looking back at you. I'd make a mummy and daddy joke, but this is just a little too creepy even for me. Seriously. Baking bread with some carefully cultured yeast no longer seems quite so outrageous. All right, let's bring this full circle and bring it back to Ötzi himself. It's tempting to dismiss this whole story as a fun publicity stunt, no different than a Victorian mummy unwrapping party. Scientists baked mummy bread. The internet had a laugh. Everyone moved on. But that's actually missing the point. The loaf is not the discovery. The really cool yeast is. The microorganisms used to bake the bread are actually pretty special. They colonized Ötzi after he fell to his death in the glacier, and they are specially adapted to surviving in extremely cold environments. In fact, the scientists needed to build a special cold incubator for them to grow. While researchers can learn about the tiny ecosystem that developed around Ötzi during thousands of years inside a glacier, that has value far beyond archaeology. In addition to understanding how organisms survive under extreme environmental conditions, cold-adapted yeast can be useful for food production, brewing, and fermentation for starters. As scientist Mohammed Sarhan said, we want to pursue this further and involve specialized research teams from the food sector in the process. Bread is currently one of the obvious applications we're considering. Another is beer. We've already discussed this with experts from Weihenstephan. So, let's chug. I would not be surprised if we start seeing some new beers and breads coming our way soon. ICEMAN beer, cold brewed and glacially refreshing. But look, the reality is that this bread, almost created on the lark by these researchers, simply proves something wonderfully simple. These ancient microbes are still alive and still functioning. They're still capable of doing what yeasts have always done, turning flour into bread, and hopefully brewing some tasty beer in the future. This story is an astonishing reminder that archaeology is more than just broken pots and old bones. Sometimes the past isn't completely dead. Sometimes tiny parts of it have simply been waiting patiently in the ice to be awoken from their long slumber, to be mixed with some dough, which can rise in your fridge. Pretty cool, huh? So yeah, what a story. This video has taken us on quite the journey, from a frozen Copper Age traveler to scientists baking bread with Ice Age yeast. But the most bizarre group of them all are the people who went mad for mummies, grinding them into medicine or paints. Like, seriously, that's just fucking plain wrong. Thankfully, archaeology, though, has changed. Instead of destroying ancient remains, we learn from them. And occasionally, if the science is good enough, we let surviving microbes bake us a loaf of bread or ferment us a tasty beer. Thanks again for tuning into Old News, where we believe all news ages like a fine wine, or in today's case, like a very old and cold sourdough starter. If you enjoyed this story, let me know in the comments. What's the strangest real archaeology story you've ever heard? Because if there's one thing archaeology has taught me, it's that our history is at least as strange as our present, sometimes more so.
Rhymes and riddles, tickle, tickle, giggles, squiggle, jiggle, fiddle.